Stephen, there won't be too many in the pensions industry that will be unfamiliar at this stage with the IORPII Directive and what it means for pensions as well. But for those who don't know and for the uninitiated, I guess, what is the IORPII Directive?
Yeah, it's crazy, Patrick. I mean, I had a beard when I started talking about IORP2, and that's come and gone. And I think I've had 2 children since. So it's really dragged on, the whole IORP2. I mean, I've spent for the last 2 years prefacing everything I've said on it with, we have to wait for the legislation to come out. So I didn't want to speak too much, but now we have the enacting legislation. So IORP2 was a piece of a European directive that should have been brought into Irish law and transposed through changes to the Pensions Act 2 years ago. And here we are, surprise, a nice benefit perhaps of some downtime due to COVID. It was transposed into legislation last week. On the 22nd of April, the minister signed the regulations.
Yeah, I think it did come as a surprise to many. Of course, as you said there, the regulations were published over 2 years after the actual deadline. So our original deadline was January 2019 for transposition in Ireland. Were there any particular reasons for that delay?
I think if you look at the regulations, I mean, yourself and myself have definitely been knee-deep in the last week or so. They run to over 70 pages. So complicated legislative changes really were needed. And the amendments to the Pensions Act, they are complex, and even going through the legislation, pensions lawyers across Ireland are probably scratching their heads and spent the weekend instead of reading the Sunday newspapers going through the legislation. So the legislation was complex, and then you had various arguments which from various parties in relation to should they apply across the board to all pension schemes, should they be limited as IORP1 was and not apply to the smaller pension schemes, and there were arguments as to why they should or should not be applied to the smaller schemes. So there was a lot of toing and froing for a long time in relation to how they'll be applied, and then obviously COVID came in, and I mean that's been the past year and a half possibly that everyone's been on a war emergency footing, so that would have delayed matters as well.
Yeah, absolutely, I think it did. Yeah, I think COVID had a lot to do with the delay in government prioritising other pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
In terms of the regulations, then, what do you think are the core aspects at this early stage trustees need to look at?
Oh, I mean, this is going to keep trustees busy for years and years. So I'd be sitting in this room and you'd have to watch me have my dinner later on this evening if I had to go through everything. But I think the core aspects, if I was a trustee, you'd be looking at the changes to do with the trustee qualification regime. And it's interesting that that was brought in to the collective trustees rather than individual trustees. So that has to be teased out. So trustees fit and proper requirements. So trustees will be very conscious of those just to make sure that they meet the criteria to continue to be trustees of pension schemes. Then you're going to have a lot more forward-looking regulation from the Pensions Authority on a risk-based basis. So that's going to require a lot of changes, and obviously you don't want to fall foul of the Pensions Authority. So you're going to have to be very conscious of the Pensions Authority's increased activity when it comes to monitoring compliance with IORP2. You're going to have a whole new range of functions, such as internal audit function in schemes, and possibly actuarial function that need to be assessed and monitored. There's new policies that'll need to be drafted for pension schemes. One member arrangements, so unfortunately the legislation came out for one member schemes and meant they were caught in the net. Now there's a 5-year period for a lot of the governance provisions for one member pension schemes to get up to speed with the regulations, so that is useful. But a lot of the investment pieces for one member schemes, for instance, investment in regulated markets, comes in immediately to new investments. So from a business practical perspective, that has the potential to change the business model for a lot of these providers. But I do think that possibly they saw the writing on the wall for a long period in relation to these changes possibly being applied to the schemes. So a lot to do, Patrick. And that's really just a minute snapshot of it, because as I said, the regulations are 73 pages. I don't think we've got to the bottom of what needs to be done. And of course, there's Pensions Authority guidance, which will add another layer, hopefully a helpful layer, onto what needs to be done as well.
Yeah, I think the guidance is eagerly anticipated at this stage. I saw the Pensions Authority had something on that yesterday as well in terms of the timeline for the guidance later in the year.
Yeah, you're looking at, I think they mentioned that the guidance will start, it's going to be drip fed, as it were, through the year, starting in May and rolling out till December. And I know there's quite a lot to go through. So, I mean, you will be dealing with a bit of a fog until that guidance comes along, because a lot of the issues will require the guidance to tease out how the legislation will work in practice.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, I think that's it for now. Trustees just have to really stay on top of it. Like you say, keep an eye out for Pensions Authority guidance, and you know, take advice on the regulations as well, perhaps in the meantime, if they have particular concerns.
Yeah, certainly. I think the key take homes for trustees and employers, I mean, as I said, for years I've kind of said IORPII is coming down the tracks and we've no date, so it landed kind of surprising us slightly. But I think trustees need to now get up to speed. A lot of the bigger schemes will already have been on a journey to compliance and may already comply with a lot of the requirements. But you're going to have various issues such as member benefit statements that will come as a surprise, and the requirement to contact deferred members. So there's a lot to do. I mean, I don't envy trustees or even scheme administrators in relation to the activities that they'll need to get up to speed quickly, because we do require the Pensions Authority guidance on this to fully advise as to how to comply. But I think there's a lot to be done, and I wouldn't want to be coming from a standing start from this. I think it's something that needs to be proactively looked at in terms of compliance with the new regulation. And I think it's something, just from discussing with clients, that they have been doing for a long period of time. But if you haven't, I think now is the time to really put this #1 on the agenda in terms of 2021 and what you need to do for your pension scheme.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot to do and a lot to go through as well for trustees. And we're going to see a lot of commentary from various bodies over the next few weeks. So I think that was very helpful, and we just have to see where it goes from here. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. To find further video content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. As well as that, you can find more detail on the regulations in our article, which is linked here.